He lost everything he loved and decided to disguise himself as a common man to discover if true love still existed in the world. But what he found was a woman treated like trash by her own family. And this discovery would change both their lives forever. Have you ever wondered what people's true colors are when there's no money or status to impress? That's exactly what happened in rural Pennsylvania, 1900, where a broken-hearted baron abandoned his title, put on workers' clothes, and set out to discover if anyone could love him for who he was, not what he owned. On that warm September morning, nobody imagined that a widowed baron and a young woman, rejected by everyone, were about to meet, and that this encounter wouldn't just transform their destinies, but would also expose the cruelty hidden behind the doors of a supposedly respectable family. Today I'm going to tell you how this unlikely encounter between a disguised baron and a rejected soul changed everything forever. Before we dive into this exciting story, I need to say how happy I am that you're here. Welcome to Storyvale. I'm so glad you chose to listen to this story and join me on this journey full of intense emotions and unexpected twists. If you enjoy stories about true love, second chances, and the power of kindness, click the subscribe button right now. Leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. Your presence here means everything. Now let's get to the story I promised. The September sun blazed over the Whitmore estate in rural Pennsylvania. The silence of the afternoon was broken only by birdsong and the distant sound of someone working in the fields. But that apparent peace hid secrets, deep wounds, and an encounter that was about to change lives forever. "You planted everything wrong, Catherine. Everything wrong!" Evelyn Whitmore's scream cut through the garden like a knife. On the other side of the stone wall, covered with climbing vines, a man stopped immediately when he heard that furious voice. He wore simple, worn clothes, a faded gray work shirt, patched trousers, and old boots covered in dried mud. He'd arrived just minutes before on the dirt road and was about to call at the gate when the screaming made him hesitate. He leaned against the wall, hidden in the shadows of the trees, and watched through a gap between the stones. A woman in a green floral dress was pointing furiously at a young woman kneeling in the dirt. "I said plant on the right side, not the left," Evelyn shouted angrily, pointing at the newly planted hydrangea seedlings. "Baron Harrison is coming this afternoon. Everything needs to be perfect to impress him for your sisters, Margaret and Elizabeth." The young woman in the gray dress, with dirt-covered hands and her face lowered in submission, murmured something inaudible. "You don't think, Catherine. Replant everything now, then go to the kitchen and help the maids." The man behind the wall frowned. That woman was treating the girl like a common servant, shouting without mercy. "What a cruel mistress," he thought with growing indignation. But then came the word that made him freeze completely. "Your sisters have been getting ready for hours," Evelyn continued shouting. "Put on something decent later, not those servant rags. If the Baron arrives and sees you like this, it'll be a disgrace to this family." The man clenched his fists hard. His dark brown eyes widened with shock. That mistreated young woman wasn't a servant. She was a daughter of the house, and that cruel woman was her mother. A mother treating her own daughter like a servant, humiliating her publicly, without any compassion. His heart tightened with indignation and compassion for the young woman in the gray dress, who remained kneeling, accepting everything in silence. The man quietly moved away from the wall and walked toward the main gate of the property. He adjusted the cloth bag on his back, ran his hand through his disheveled hair, and took a deep breath. He knocked on the wooden gate firmly and called out in a grave, respectful voice, "Permission to speak with the owners of the house?" Evelyn turned sharply at the voice, frowning with irritation. Catherine also raised her head, surprised by the interruption. Evelyn walked to the gate with firm steps, chin raised. Catherine followed timidly a few meters behind. "Who are you and what do you want here?" Evelyn demanded coldly, evaluating the ragged stranger from head to toe with critical eyes. The man bowed respectfully, keeping his eyes lowered in submission. "Good afternoon, ma'am. My name is John," he said with studied humility. "I come from far away looking for honest work. I heard in the village that the Whitmore estate is respectable, and I came to offer my services." Evelyn crossed her arms over her chest, hardening her face even more. "We don't have money to hire workers," she replied dryly, already prepared to dismiss him. "We can barely pay the few employees we still have here." The man stepped forward quickly, keeping his humble tone but urgent. "I'm not asking for money, ma'am. I'll work just for shelter and food." Evelyn hesitated, biting her lip as she evaluated the broad shoulders and strong arms of the man under his worn shirt. Before she could respond, Catherine spoke softly beside her. "Mother, Father has been complaining for weeks that he urgently needs someone to care for the horses. The mare's hooves need trimming before the Baron's visit this afternoon." Her voice was gentle and practical. Evelyn looked at her daughter, then at the stranger, calculating quickly. If he cost no money and they urgently needed help with the animals, maybe it was worth it. Finally, she sighed with impatience. "Very well. You'll have to speak with my husband, Thomas, first. He decides these things." She turned to Catherine with a severe look. "Take him to the study to speak with your father. Now." Catherine opened the gate and signaled for him to enter. "Come, Mr. John," she said in a low voice. They walked in silence through the garden, then down a corridor to a dark wooden door. Catherine knocked softly. "Father, there's someone here?" The dry, impatient voice of Thomas answered from inside. "Come in." She opened the door, revealing a thin man of about 60, seated behind a desk covered with papers. Thomas raised his eyes briefly, not hiding his irritation at the interruption. "What is it?" he asked harshly, without greetings or courtesies. Catherine kept her voice soft. "This is John, Father. He's looking for work in exchange for shelter and food. Mother said you should speak with him, since we need someone for the horses." Thomas evaluated the man for only a few seconds with a cold, calculating look. "Do you know how to care for horses?" he asked directly, without preambles. "Yes, sir," the man replied. Thomas nodded distractedly, already returning his attention to the papers in front of him. "Catherine, bring me coffee." "Now," he ordered without looking at his daughter, "then show him the back shed and explain the work." He looked briefly at the stranger with a hard expression. "There's no money to pay, just shelter and food. If that suits you, start today." And with a brusque wave of his hand, he dismissed them without saying anything more, returning to review his accounts as if they no longer existed. Catherine led the man outside in silence. First, she went to the kitchen to get the coffee her father had demanded, returning quickly with a tray. She entered the study alone to serve while he waited in the corridor. Moments later, she came out, closing the door carefully, and signaled for him to follow. They walked through the back of the property, passing fragrant orange trees until they reached the faded red wooden stables. "The shed is back there," she indicated, pointing. "There's clean hay inside and a water pump on the side. The horses are here in the stables." She hesitated for a moment, biting her lip. "Welcome, Mr. John." Catherine quickly returned to the main house. The man stood watching her walk away. Then he walked to the shed and entered. It was spacious, with piles of golden hay in the corners and dark wooden beams on the ceiling. There was a small window overlooking the back of the main house. He put his bag in a corner, sat on the hay, and finally allowed his shoulders to relax. He closed his eyes for a long moment, thinking about everything he'd just witnessed. The cruelty of that mother, the coldness of that father, the silent kindness of young Catherine. Then he took a deep breath, because it was time to remember who he really was. His name wasn't John. It was William Harrison, Baron of Lancaster County, lord of vast lands and one of the wealthiest and most powerful men in all of Pennsylvania. William was 35 years old and he was tired, deeply tired. A widower for 3 years, he'd lost his beloved wife, Eleanor, in a difficult childbirth that also took the baby. Since then, he'd lived immersed in a silent pain that all the money in the world couldn't heal. His family had been pressuring him for over a year to marry again. They said he needed a wife, children, to continue the lineage. But each formal visit to estates in the region was the same empty farce. Women painted like dolls, flattering parents, conversations about possessions and lineages. Nobody saw the real man behind the Baron's title. That's when William had a bold idea. Visit these families disguised as a poor worker before the official visits, to see their true faces, to observe who they really were when they weren't pretending to impress a wealthy nobleman. His younger brother, Michael, thought he was crazy but ended up agreeing. He was also fed up with empty, self-interested noblewomen. William had scheduled official visits as Baron to several properties in the following weeks. and the Whitmore estate was first on the list. But before the formal visit, he would arrive days earlier, disguised as John, to observe who the Whitmores really were when they weren't pretending. That afternoon, families would receive a communication. Baron William Harrison was indisposed with a strong fever and couldn't attend the visit scheduled for that afternoon. He wanted to observe the Whitmores without mass, and what he'd seen so far already revealed much: cruelty, falseness, and a kind young woman mistreated by her own family. William left the shed and went straight to the adjacent stables, where he began caring for the neglected horses. There were 7 in total: 4 mares, 2 stallions, and a young colt. All were too thin, with ribs visible under their dull coat, and hooves cracked from lack of care. But they were animals of good breeding, beautiful under the layer of dirt and neglect. William had 20 horses on his own property. He called each one by name as if they were family. Seeing these 7 noble animals treated with such neglect infuriated him deeply. "What a waste," he murmured, while carefully combing the tangled mane of a gray mare that looked at him with sad, distrustful eyes. "You deserve so much more than this." He worked with care and affection, cleaning, feeding, and speaking softly to each animal, as he always did. Night fell completely, and the full moon illuminated the shed through the small window when William finally heard soft footsteps approaching. The wooden door opened slowly, and Catherine entered, carrying a tray covered with a clean cloth. She wore the same worn gray dress, but now her brown hair was loose, falling in natural waves over her shoulders and down to her waist. The soft light from the kerosene lamp she carried illuminated her delicate face, and for the first time, William truly noticed her hidden beauty. It wasn't the flashy, artificial beauty of women he knew in salons, but something deeper and genuine. Her light brown eyes shone with kindness, and there was a natural grace in her movements, even dressed in rags. William felt something move in his chest, something he hadn't felt since Eleanor had died. Catherine placed the tray on a wooden crate and removed the cloth, revealing not miserable dry bread, but an abundant and generous plate: roasted meat still steaming, golden potatoes, cooked carrots, a large piece of fresh bread, and even a mug of clean water. The aroma was wonderful. William looked at the plate, then at her, surprised. "Miss Catherine," he began. She sat on a pile of nearby hay, adjusting her worn skirt around her legs. "I'll wait for you to finish eating to take the plate back, Mr. John," she said softly. "I don't want my mother to see that I brought more than she ordered." William hesitated, then picked up the plate and also sat down. "I overheard the conversation in the living room earlier. Your mother asked you to bring only dry bread." Catherine gave a small, sad smile, but her eyes remained kind. "Don't worry, Mr. John. I'll always bring proper food while you're working here. It's only fair." She looked at her own calloused hands resting in her lap. "Please forgive the things my parents say. They're under a lot of pressure because of debts and financial problems. It's no excuse for cruelty, I know, but it's their reality." There was a surprising maturity in her voice, a deep understanding of human nature that didn't match her apparent youth. William watched her as he ate slowly, studying every detail of her face in the lamplight's soft glow. And in that moment, there in the humble shed surrounded by the smell of hay and horses, he began to think something he hadn't dared to think in years. Maybe, just maybe, this young woman was different from all the others. The revelation by the creek. The next day dawned clear and hot. William woke early in the shed to the singing of birds and soft neighing of the horses in the stables. As he sat up, he noticed something that hadn't been there the night before: a small improvised table made from wooden crates, and on it, carefully covered with a clean cloth, a steaming clay mug of hot coffee and a generous piece of fresh bread with yellow cheese. His heart warmed instantly. Catherine must have come before dawn, while he slept, to leave that simple but thoughtful breakfast. After eating, he began working with renewed energy. He spent the whole morning reorganizing the shed, cleaned every corner, swept the packed earth floor, fixed a loose ceiling beam, organized the rusty tools thrown in a corner. Then he went to the stables and worked on the stalls, removing all the dirty straw and replacing it with fresh hay, fixing the creaking wooden doors, reviewing every detail with the meticulous care of someone who truly cares. Around noon, he led the 7 horses to the green pasture at the back of the property, watching with satisfaction as they ran free for the first time in a long while. During all that intense work, William discreetly observed the main house in the distance, and what he saw impressed and outraged him more and more. Catherine didn't stop for a single minute all morning. He saw her exit through the kitchen door carrying heavy buckets of water, then sweep the entire front porch, then shake enormous rugs that raised clouds of dust in the hot air. She ran from one side to the other, answering invisible calls, always in that worn gray dress, always with the slightly bent posture of someone carrying too much weight on young shoulders. Meanwhile, her sisters Margaret and Elizabeth appeared on the porch only once, laughing loudly, dressed in light, colorful clothes, fanning themselves lazily before returning to the cool interior of the house. The difference in treatment was shocking and revolting. That afternoon, when the sun began to decline on the horizon, painting everything orange and gold, William was giving water to the horses when he saw Catherine descend the steep trail that led to the creek at the bottom of the property. She carried an enormous wicker basket overflowing with dirty laundry, sheets, dresses, shirts, towels, that must have weighed almost as much as she did. The basket was so heavy that she had to stop every few steps to rest her trembling arms. William watched her disappear among the trees lining the creek, and something inside him, a mixture of curiosity, concern, and a growing interest he couldn't deny, compelled him to follow her discreetly. He left the horses grazing peacefully and walked silently along the same trail, keeping a safe distance so as not to be noticed. The creek was a beautiful, isolated place, surrounded by weeping willows whose branches hung like green curtains over the crystalline water flowing gently over smooth stones. William stopped behind a wide trunk, hidden among the shadows, and observed. Catherine had left the heavy basket on the bank and now looked around carefully, checking if she was really alone. Apparently satisfied with the privacy, she began to slowly undress, removing the worn gray dress. William, out of respect, turned away and sat behind a tree. He knew he should leave, that he was invading a private moment, but his feet seemed nailed to the ground. He decided to wait until she came out. He kept his eyes respectfully averted, looking at the trees, the sky, anywhere that wasn't directly in her direction, but he was aware of every sound, the soft splashing of water, her sigh of relief as she washed away the sweat and dirt from the whole day, the low murmur of a song she hummed softly while bathing. There was something deeply moving about that simple scene. A young woman stealing a few minutes of peace and cleanliness in the middle of an exhausting day of endless work. After a few minutes that seemed like hours, William heard the sounds of her leaving the water, the noise of clothes being put on again. He waited patiently, giving her time to fully compose herself. When he judged enough time had passed, William took a deep breath and advanced deliberately down the trail, making noise with heavy footsteps on dry leaves to announce his arrival. As he came around the curve between the trees, Catherine was already fully dressed again in the gray dress, her wet hair tied in a loose braid, and she was kneeling on the creek bank, vigorously scrubbing a white sheet against a smooth, soap-covered stone. She raised her head, surprised to hear the footsteps, and her eyes widened when she saw him. "Mr. John," she exclaimed, bringing her wet hand to her chest. "I didn't hear you coming. Do you need something?" William approached slowly, maintaining a respectful and humble posture. "Forgive me for startling you, Miss Catherine. I saw you come down with that very heavy basket and thought I'd offer help to carry it back." Catherine looked at the enormous basket, still full of wet clothes waiting to be hung, and smiled with genuine tiredness. "That's very kind of you, Mr. John, but you don't need to worry. I'm used to this." William shook his head firmly. "I insist, miss. I've finished my work with the horses and have free time. Let me at least carry the basket back to the house when you're done." She hesitated, biting her lower lip with uncertainty, but then nodded gently. "All right. Thank you, Mr. John." She returned to scrubbing the sheet against the stone with rhythmic, experienced movements. William sat on a nearby stone, watching her work. The silence was comfortable, broken only by the sound of running water and fabric being washed. After a few minutes, he spoke casually. "How long have you lived here, Miss Catherine?" She didn't raise her eyes from the laundry. "I was born here. This has always been my home." Her voice was soft, without resentment, just stating a simple fact. "And your sisters? Are they older or younger than you?" "Margaret is 22. Elizabeth is 20. I'm the youngest, 19. She wrung out the sheet hard, water dripping between her fingers. "They're very beautiful and talented. My mother has high hopes that they'll make good marriages." William noticed she didn't include herself in that hope. "And you don't think about marriage?" Catherine finally stopped washing and looked at him with those light brown eyes that seemed to hold more wisdom than her age suggested. A small, sad smile curved her lips. "I'm not the type of woman men look for to marry, Mr. John." She said this without self-pity, just as one would declare that the sky is blue or water is wet. "I have no dowry. I'm not beautiful like my sisters, and I don't have the social skills necessary to impress suitors. I've learned to accept my place." William felt something tighten in his chest. How could this kind and beautiful young woman, because she was beautiful, though clearly didn't know it, have so little regard for herself? "I respectfully disagree, miss. I think any man with eyes to see would recognize your value." Catherine looked at him surprised, her cheeks blushing slightly. "You're very kind, but you don't need to lie to make me feel better." She returned to work, but William noticed her movements were less certain, as if his words had shaken her somehow. They worked in companionable silence until all the laundry was washed. Catherine hung the wet pieces over the low branches of the willows to dry a bit before taking them back. Then William picked up the basket, now even heavier with the soaked clothes, and lifted it easily onto his shoulder. Catherine watched him do this without apparent effort, impressed by his strength. "You're very strong, Mr. John." He smiled modestly. "I've worked all my life with my hands. It strengthens a man." They began climbing the steep trail back to the house. William adjusted the basket on his shoulder and offered his free arm to Catherine. "Hold on to me, miss. The trail is slippery." She hesitated only a moment before accepting, placing her small, calloused hand on his arm. William felt a warmth spread through his chest at that simple touch. They climbed slowly, he taking care not to go too fast and tire her. "May I ask a personal question, Miss Catherine?" he ventured when they were halfway up. She looked at him with curiosity. "You may, Mr. John. Why do your parents treat you differently from your sisters?" The question came out more direct than he intended, and he immediately regretted it when he saw her face close off. Catherine looked away, focusing on the path ahead. She was silent for so long that William thought she wouldn't answer. Finally, when they were already reaching the top of the trail, she spoke in a voice so low he had to lean in to hear. "Because I'm not my father's daughter." The words fell like stones in the silence of the afternoon. William stopped walking, turning to face her completely. Catherine kept her eyes lowered, cheeks flushed with shame. "My mother had an involvement before she definitively married my father. She got pregnant. My real father was a poor man who worked on the family lands. When they discovered it, he left and never came back." Her voice was devoid of emotion, as if she were telling someone else's story. "Thomas Whitmore still married my mother, even knowing she was carrying another man's child. He was generous in that sense, but he never forgave me for existing, never saw me as a real daughter." She finally raised her eyes to face him, and William saw there an old, deep pain. "My sisters are his blood daughters. I'm just the bastard he had to accept as part of the marriage agreement. That's why they treat me the way they do. And I understand, Mr. John, I really do. I can't blame them for something that wasn't my fault, but also wasn't their fault." William was silent, processing that revelation. So many things made sense now. The cruelty, the disdain, the servant treatment, and even so, Catherine held no grudge. She had a heart so pure that she could understand and forgive those who mistreated her daily. "Miss Catherine," he said with a grave and sincere voice, "nothing you just told me diminishes your value. If anything, it only shows how strong and good you are to carry that burden with so much grace and dignity." Tears shone in Catherine's eyes, but she blinked quickly to push them away. "Thank you, Mr. John. You have a kind heart." She squeezed his arm lightly before releasing it. "But we should go back before my mother notices I'm taking too long." They finished climbing the trail in silence. When they reached the backyard, Catherine indicated a wooden clothesline near the kitchen. You can leave the basket there, please. I'll hang the rest now. William carefully placed the basket on the ground and turned to leave, but she called him softly. Mr. John. He turned. Thank you, not just for carrying the basket, but for listening and for not judging me. He nodded respectfully. It was a privilege, Miss Catherine. And with that, he returned to the shed, but his mind remained with her, processing everything he'd discovered. That night, Thomas was in the study with Evelyn. She still wore the green floral dress from the day, but now her sagging shoulders betrayed accumulated exhaustion and frustration. We need to talk, Thomas, she said in a tense voice, sitting in the chair before the desk. The Baron canceled. We don't know when he'll come, and Mr. Jacobson is demanding payment by next week. Thomas ran his hands over his tired face. His eyes reddened from calculating impossible figures on the papers spread before him. I don't have any more money, Evelyn, he murmured, with a voice broken by desperation. Mr. Jacobson isn't a man to wait. He's already sent 3 warnings. If we don't pay by next week, he'll take everything he wants, and there will be serious consequences. Evelyn pressed her lips into a thin line, her face hardening. That vulgar, fat drunkard, she spat with venom. Why did you borrow money from him, Thomas? Of all the creditors in the region, it had to be precisely Mr. Jacobson. You know very well he gives no quarter when someone owes him. He's relentless. Thomas slammed his fist on the table, making the lamp tremble. I had no choice. No bank would lend us any more. He was the only one who accepted, and now we're trapped. Heavy silence filled the study for long moments, broken only by the tick-tock of the wall clock in the corner. Thomas stared fixedly at the impossible accounts, his forehead furrowed in painful concentration. Then slowly he raised his eyes to his wife with an expression that mixed desperation and cold calculation. I was thinking, he began hesitantly, his voice low, about offering one of the girls. Evelyn's eyes widened, immediately understanding what he was suggesting. To Mr. Jacobson? She asked incredulously, her voice rising an octave. Have you gone mad, Thomas? I won't marry my daughters to that repulsive man. He drinks like a barrel and treats women like property. They deserve noblemen, young and rich. Not that disgusting pig. Thomas leaned forward, his hard eyes shining with desperate determination. What about Catherine? The question fell like a stone in the silence of the study. Evelyn remained motionless, her mouth half open. Catherine, she repeated slowly, the name sounding strange on her lips. Thomas nodded, gesturing with his hands. Think about it, Evelyn. Catherine wouldn't give an opinion. She never has an opinion about anything. We decide and she obeys as she always has. The debt is too high, and Mr. Jacobson would certainly accept a Whitmore's hand in marriage as payment. He's always looked at our daughters with interest. His voice carried disgust, but also brutal pragmatism. Evelyn was silent, processing the horrible proposal. Then slowly a cruel smile began to form on her painted lips. It's true, she murmured thoughtfully, the smile growing. It could be a good idea. Actually, Catherine is young, healthy, and would adequately fulfill the role of wife. Mr. Jacobson would be satisfied, and our debt would be forgiven. She looked at her husband with eyes shining with cold, calculated relief. And thus Margaret and Elizabeth would be free to marry the Baron or other appropriate nobleman when the opportunity arises. Thomas nodded vigorously, clearly relieved that she agreed. Exactly what I was thinking. It's the perfect solution. Evelyn raised her hand doubtfully. But let's wait for now. We don't need to make that decision today. We still have a few days. If the Baron confirms a new visit before the deadline, maybe we'll find another solution. She left the sentence hanging, threatening. Thomas nodded gravely, understanding perfectly. If he doesn't confirm, we'll offer Catherine to Mr. Jacobson. The next evening, as the sun began to set, painting everything orange and gold, William was giving water to the horses when a carriage arrived at the Whitmore estate. A fat, poorly dressed man who reeked of whiskey descended. Mr. Jacobson was about 60 years old, with a prominent belly stretching the buttons of his sweat-yellowed shirt. He had small, cruel eyes that evaluated everything around him with the greed of someone who saw the world only as things to be possessed or exploited. William watched from a distance as Thomas nervously received him and led him to the study. About an hour later, he heard shouting. Then he saw Evelyn rush out of the house looking for Catherine. She found her in the kitchen and grabbed her arm roughly. "Come with me now. There's someone who wants to meet you." Catherine's confused and frightened face made William's blood boil. He moved closer to the house, staying in the shadows, trying to hear what was happening. Through the study window, he watched as Catherine was pushed inside. He saw Jacobson circle her like a predator, saw the girl's face turn pale with horror. Then he heard it. "Take off that horrible dress. I want to see what's underneath those rags." Catherine's desperate "No!" echoed through the window. Evelyn's shout, "Do what he says." That was enough. William was about to storm in when Catherine suddenly broke free and ran. She burst out the back door, tears streaming down her face, and ran straight for the shed. William ran after her. She stumbled into the shed, fell to her knees on the hay, sobbing uncontrollably. Seconds later, William entered, quietly closing the door behind him. "Catherine," he whispered urgently, kneeling beside her. She turned and, without thinking, threw herself into his arms, crying desperately against his chest. William held her tightly, one hand stroking her hair, the other supporting her trembling back. "You're safe," he murmured softly. "You're safe now. Tell me what happened." Between sobs, Catherine told him everything. The debt, the horrible man, the forced marriage, the humiliation she almost suffered. William felt his anger grow with each word, a cold, controlled fury that burned in his veins. How dare they? How dare they treat her like merchandise, sell her to that pig to pay off debts? But he kept his voice calm, comforting, because Catherine needed comfort now, not more anger. "Listen carefully," he said firmly, gently pulling her away so he could look into her tear-red eyes. "You will not marry that man. I will not allow it. Do you understand?" Catherine shook her head, confused. "But Mr. John, you can't do anything. You're just a worker. And they've already decided. I have no choice." "Yes, you do," William insisted. "You always have a choice, and I'll make sure you have one." They heard voices approaching, Evelyn calling for Catherine, Jacobson shouting obscenities. William stood quickly, thinking. He couldn't let her be found here. "Come," he whispered, pulling her by the hand. He led her to the darkest corner of the shed, where the hay piles were highest. "Hide here behind. Don't make a sound, no matter what you hear. Promise." Catherine, trembling, squeezed into the tight space between the hay and the wall. William quickly arranged more hay in front, hiding her completely from view. Then he returned to the center of the shed and sat casually, as if he'd just been resting. The shed door burst open violently, and Evelyn entered with the lantern, followed closely by the staggering Jacobson. "Where is she?" Evelyn demanded, looking around frantically. "I know she came here." William stood slowly, feigning sleepy confusion. "What are you talking about, ma'am? I've been here alone since you took Miss Catherine away earlier." Jacobson advanced threateningly. "Don't lie to us, you vagrant. The girl ran away, and this was the only place she could have gone." William maintained his humble posture, but his eyes were hard. "I haven't seen anyone, sir. The shed is empty." Evelyn wasn't convinced. She began tearing through the hay with her hands, searching desperately. Jacobson also started searching, more clumsily and aggressively. William watched anxiously, ready to intervene if they got too close to Catherine's hiding place. Finally, after several minutes of fruitless searching, Evelyn gave up with a frustrated scream. "She must have gone into the woods," as she decided. "We'll search out there." Jacobson spat on the ground with disgust. "That ungrateful girl will pay for this." Jacobson spat on the ground with disgust. "That ungrateful girl will pay for this when I find her." Evelyn grabbed his arm, lowering her voice. "Let's go. She can't have gone far." They left the shed, their footsteps fading into the distance. William stood frozen until he was sure they were gone. Only then did he move quickly to the pile of hay. "Catherine," he whispered. She emerged shaking, her face pale, eyes wide with terror. "They're gone," he said softly. "You're safe." She collapsed against him again, crying in silence this time, her whole body trembling. William closed his eyes. That was the moment he knew. The disguise was over. William gently pulled away and looked straight into her eyes. "Catherine, there's something you need to know about me." She wiped her tears, confused. My name is not John. Her breath caught. My real name is William Harrison. She stared at him, not understanding. I am the Baron of Lancaster County. Silence. The words hung in the air like thunder. Catherine stepped back slowly, shaking her head. No, that's not possible. You're joking. Please don't joke right now. I would never joke about this, he said calmly. Watching. I came here disguised to see who people really are when they think no one important is. Her legs gave out. She sat down on the hay. You're the Baron? She whispered. Yes. Tears streamed down her face again, but now they were different, confused, overwhelmed. You were kind to me when you thought I was nothing, she said. William knelt in front of her. You were never nothing. You were the only real thing I found here. He took a deep breath. And what your parents planned tonight is a crime, one that ends now. Before dawn, William sent a rider with his seal to summon the local magistrate. By morning, the Whitmore house was in chaos. Jacobson was arrested for coercion and abuse. Thomas was charged for attempting to sell his daughter to pay a debt. Evelyn screamed, begged, cursed. No one listened. Catherine stood beside William on the front steps, wrapped in a clean cloak for the first time in her life. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She simply watched as the house that had broken her lost all its power. You don't owe them anything anymore, William said quietly. She nodded. I know. Catherine left the estate that same day. Not as a servant, not as a burden, not as a problem to be hidden. She left as a free woman. At William's estate, everything felt unreal to her at first. The space, the silence, the respect. No one shouted at her, no one ordered her, no one humiliated her, and William never rushed her. Weeks passed, they talked, they walked, they laughed softly. And one evening, sitting by the fire, Catherine finally spoke. You loved your wife very much, William nodded. I did. And you're still healing, she said gently. Yes. She looked at him with quiet courage. So am I. That was when he realized. Love didn't arrive loudly. It arrived gently, respectfully, patiently. William asked her to marry him months later, not with pressure, not with promises of wealth, but with honesty. I don't need you to save me, Catherine said. I just want to walk beside you. And that's exactly what they did. The rejected girl became a baroness, not because of a title, but because of her heart. And the widowed baron found love again, not among polished smiles, but among quiet strength and kindness. Sometimes the world only shows its true face when it thinks no one important is watching. And sometimes, the person everyone overlooked is the one who changes everything. If this story touched your heart, stay with us. More stories like this are waiting for you. Until next time.